Hello everyone, this is Sarah O'Keefe at Scriptorium. Welcome to the 6 Easy Ways to Control Your Localization Costs webcast. A couple of quick things before Bill gets started. We are recording this event, so you will have the option of seeing the slides and the recording after the fact. We will be taking questions through the Questions tab, so at this point you might want to take a look around in your interface, find the Questions area, and go ahead and start thinking about those questions that you want Bill to answer for you. A couple of upcoming events. We have a DITA Oxygen and DITA Open Toolkit class coming up. This is a hands-on, in-person classroom thing in August in Santa Clara, California. It's on our events list if you're interested. And our next webcast will be in the middle of August, and it's called The Business Case for Better Technical Communication. So that'll be a nice tie-in to what Bill Swallow is going to talk about today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill. Bill and I have known each other for a really long time and have a really good time working in TechCom and causing all sorts of trouble. Bill is over at LinguaLinx, where he is doing content strategy work for them. So Bill, are you there?
I am here. Thanks for having me.
Take it away.
All right. Thanks everyone for attending. This is 6 Easy Ways to Control Your Localization Costs. And my name is Bill Swallow. I'm the Content Solutions Manager at LinguaLinx, and I am responsible for the GlobalScript division of the company. And I have roughly about 17 years experience in technical communication, everything from writing, editing, all the way up through management and strategy. About LinguaLinx very quickly, we are an LSP, or a localization service provider, located in Cuthose, New York, and we offer a full line of services regarding any kind of language need you may have, from translation to interpretation, voiceovers, you name it, we handle it, and we handle it for roughly about 1,000 diverse clients every year. GlobalScript specifically, as Sarah mentioned, is a content strategy arm of LinguaLinx, and we consult with our clients to help them better prepare for taking their content global, and really work with them to help streamline exactly what goes into producing all of the various deliverables that they need to provide either internally or to their customer base. Before I start, I want to get into a few definitions, just in case you're unfamiliar with some of the terminology that we might be throwing around today. And these are in order from, I guess, grandest scope to tightest scope. So first you have globalization, which is really all of the company-wide things that you need to do to get ready to start engaging a multicultural audience. Then you have internationalization, where you start to build a little bit more of a technological foundation for how you're going to handle this, separating your content from the form. In software, you would be using resource files rather than hard coding strings, for example, and so forth. Then you have localization, which is adapting everything to a particular country or region. And within localization, you also have the translation, which is adapting meaning from one language into another. So before we jump right in, I would like to take a poll real quick to see if you're currently translating or localizing your content. And it looks like we have a good deal of responses in already. We'll give it a few more seconds just to kind of see where we end up. And it looks like predominantly we have localization, but only for some of our materials. About 20% do not expect to start soon, and about 13% say that you localize everything. And I was actually amazed to see that nobody is not localizing, which is very good to see. So the 6 easy ways to control your localization costs. I thought I'd lay them all out here for you and then start going through each one in more detail. All Very quickly, plan for all your localized needs up front. Consult with your translation vendor throughout the entire process of whether it's one project, whether it's a series of projects, or whether it's an ongoing need. Consult with them on a daily basis or a regular basis. Use consistent and controlled content as much as possible. Design all of your templates and layouts so that they fit every need that you have. And we'll get more into what I mean by that. Use localization-friendly technologies, which may seem rather self-explanatory, but you'd be surprised what comes through the doors for translation at times. And ensure the cheapest path, or the easiest path, which is also tends to be the cheapest path for round-tripping your content. So planning for all of your localization, sorry, I can't talk today. Planning for all of your localized needs up front. Localization and translation, it's not just about translating what you have, but it's making sure that your audience has what they need in the form that they need it. Same thing with developing your plan for English-based content or whatever your source language may be. You need to also think about that on your target market side. Localization is not a project end activity. It may seem like it, and I know a lot of there's always a lot of hustle and bustle at the end of a project to get things localized, translated, and back and out. But in all fairness, it really should be an ongoing investigation. You need to really start planning for it from the very beginning, because your non-English or non-source speaking audience is also your audience. So when you do your audience analysis and everything, you need to make sure that you're taking their needs also into consideration. And every single aspect of your content strategy impacts and is impacted by your localized needs. Why is it important? Translation is it's only one piece of the complete picture when you're looking to deliver to multiple countries. Any technology that you implement can impact translation. It can impact the quality, the time, and the cost for producing the translation, and also for entering those markets. Not every user experience is the same worldwide, so you need to be able to account for that. And all of your needs and expectations are going to shift, especially as more countries start coming into your global plan, and you need to be able to quickly shift with them. So having a plan and being prepared up front will help you make very nimble decisions as you go forward. One thing that I like to talk about is the 110-100 rule. We used to use this in software development, but it also applies to localization as well. When you run into a problem, fixing it at the very beginning or planning stage and accounting for it is a very cheap solution. You're able to really react and solve problems relatively cheaply and easily when you're still at the planning stage. Once you get your project rolling or start getting infrastructure implemented and you come across a problem, it's going to cost significantly more than it would if you had planned around it from the beginning. And then when you get to a point where you've already started distributing content or delivering whatever it is that you're delivering out there, if you run across a problem, it can cost a tremendous amount to fix it. We see a lot of things where we go back and forth with some of our clients about, is the content final? Is the content final? Is this the exact thing that you want to say in these markets? Yes, yes, yes. Do the translation, come back, do a full layout, and we're all set for 19 different languages, and then they come back and say, we really want to change this one thing. Well, now the change needs to happen in X many places, so however many languages you have. So catching it beforehand saves a lot more money, and the further up the chain that you catch it, the cheaper it becomes. You have to keep a diverse audience in mind when you're planning your products or your releases, and you need to ensure that you have a very strong adherence to style. You may have a global style guide that you're following. You must also make sure that you have specific nuances addressed for target markets where they may not prefer receiving particular types of information. We know a lot on the sales and marketing side that while in the United States it's perfectly acceptable to say this is the best product ever, going into other countries it's actually a very strong no-no. You can't say that about your product. You can't even say that it's better than another product. So you have to kind of switch how you're pitching a lot of your material when you go to different countries. You need to keep all of your technology decisions in check and plan for any exceptions along the way. It's not to say you need to think of everything up front, but you have to be aware that there may be considerations that you need to leave an open mind for and an escape route if you need to from one decision to another. Planning for it up front obviously will keep your costs down because you'll be able to mitigate a lot of the problems before you start implementing and delivering. And you need to ensure that your translators are prepared with the content and the correct approach for translating it for your audiences. And it's very important that I pitch developing the global content strategy. We talk about content strategy a lot, and there are many different definitions depending on who you talk to with regard to what a content strategy is. When I talk about global content strategies, I'm talking about making sure that not only are you reaching the audience in the way that you need to, but that you are working and have the infrastructure available to target all of your needs. You need to take into consideration the content types that you're putting out there, that your audience is extremely diverse, that your authors may be extremely diverse, not just perhaps authoring from a TechCom side and a MarCom side and a sales side, but also perhaps you have authors in many different countries contributing to your delivered works. Global content strategy should align with all of your corporate goals. If it doesn't, then you really don't have a solid strategy in place, because the strategy should ultimately support exactly where your company is trying to go and how it's trying to get there, which would further strengthen your corporate brand. And a global content strategy is not any one single actionable plan. It's not simply a technology implementation. It's actually rather troublesome when you hear about companies who invest a lot of money in the technology because they believe it's going to solve all of their multilingual problems or all of their content management problems, and it turns out creating more of a mess than if they had stuck to what they were doing originally. So you need to really keep in mind that technology is only a portion of your strategy. Global content strategy is not a siloed activity. You can't have a global content strategy within TechCom that doesn't address MarCom strategy and implementation. You can't have one in MarCom that doesn't address sales and technical support and so forth. It has to be a unified approach, and it has to address a translation workflow. The second easy way to control your costs is to consult with your translation vendor throughout. Your translation vendor really is your local market subject matter expert. When you're working on a project or you're working to deliver content globally, list of people who should be involved obviously are not limited to this list, but this is a good one to start with. All of your writers, your product development people, your product management people, marketing, sales, support, and localization, and any other group that is involved or impacted by what you're doing really should be involved at all stages of the game. Involving everyone from beginning to end is critical because every group brings a unique and critical insight to what you're doing. They may have issues that need to be addressed by other groups, and also they may have insight that will impact how other groups respond and plan. The needs are going to vary across the board. Some needs may conflict. You have to plan for it and scope it out, and in some cases duke it out until you have a plan that works for everyone. And it's very important to meet regularly with all of these people. to make sure that everyone's on the same page and that the path is very, very clear in everyone's mind of where you need to go and how you're going to get there. And at every stage of the way, you have to keep your market needs and expectations in mind. Having a plan for translation is great, but if 60% of your overseas market or your European market or your Asian market or what have you uses a mobile device for their primary content consumption, you need to be able to plan for that, even though you may be targeting PDFs and online help for for your U.S. or North American market. Now, how to involve your translation vendor? You should be in contact with them at the very beginning and let them know what you're doing, and make sure that they're receptive to working with you at all stages of the game. You want to include them in strategic planning if at all possible, and if you can't, at a minimum, you should supply them with updates on decisions that are being made and worked out within your company until you are ready to or able to bring them into the fold. Including your localization vendor within the tactical planning is a must. Being able to bounce off them ideas about infrastructure and about content design before you start designing templates, before you start writing content. Make sure that your style guide is reviewed for all potential markets, all potential language markets, and make sure that the technology that you're using to produce all of these and deliver them is localization or is multilingual friendly. Let's see. There are a few different translation options, and you may decide that some of these you may opt to use more than one. I'm going to talk a little bit about human translation, machine translation, and crowdsourced translation. Now, human translation typically performed by professional translators who are fluent in both languages and the subject matter that you're dealing with. And ideally, you want to try to find someone who is local to where you're targeting that information and also has experience within your field. This way, you get the highest accuracy and quality in the translation coming back. Humans obviously are able to transcreate content wherever appropriate, however is needed, and they can be engaged directly in developing your strategy. The only thing to consider there is that using people, of course, is going to come at a higher cost than using machine translation because you just have a human factor in play, and it's going to take a little bit longer, but your quality is going to be far greater. With machine translation, it's performed by software, and you get questionable accuracy and quality in translation. A lot of times, you have to tune your machine translation to exactly, to react and understand your style and understand how it needs to be presented in other languages. And still, you're going to need to do a post-translation proof and probably a lot of cleanup as well. And you won't be able to transcreate content. What I mean by transcreate content is when you have a concept that isn't easily translatable or isn't mechanically translatable to another language where it's understandable, your translator would then need to figure out another way to pitch the same idea and to form the same concept in a way that your local market in that language will understand it and be able to relate to it. Machine translation obviously has a lower cost, although this lower cost is somewhat questionable because you do have a lot of post-translation work that needs to happen, and you really do need to account for that in your translation costs. And you do have a shorter duration for getting that initial translation done, although the editing may consume a good deal amount of time as well. And then the third form that I want to talk about a bit is crowdsourced translation, which is performed by a mix of people. It's generally, I would reserve crowdsourced translation for any kind of perpetually living content. So something like blogs, any other kind of social content, wikis and so forth, where you have a community-driven approach to translating the content so that others in the community, whether it's an internal community or a global community in the public eye, can best digest the content that's being presented, whether it be via form translation or what have you, or even translation of comments that roll in on a board or a blog. With crowdsourced, obviously you're dealing with people again, so you're able to transcreate content where appropriate, although you may still need to do some post-translation cleanup because the people performing the translation may not be experts in the subject matter or may not be native speakers of the language that they're translating into, and may not understand the local dialects that need to be used. Another reason to consult your translation vendor is that cultural differences are small but noticeable, and this is a very basic example, but you can extrapolate this across pretty much anything that you would take for granted in one country. Chances are it's going to be a little different once you get into another. In the case of the mailbox, you have 3 examples here. One of the lunchbox style that you see outside most American homes, or one that you might see over in the UK, as opposed to something you might see more in an urban setting. Everyone's got a different type of mailbox, but when you're talking about, in this case, mail, there is a more universally identifiable symbol that you can use to use this across multiple geographies and multiple cultures, and that would be the envelope. So I'd like to take another poll at this point to see how you create your content. It looks like we have about 70% of people responding. Okay, and it looks like the majority of people are authoring via unstructured, so using Word, unstructured FrameMaker, etc. About 13% are using structured authoring, and 7% are using a little bit of both. So now I want to talk a little bit about using consistent controlled content. Translation shouldn't be a problem so long as your content's good. Well, that's kind of goes without saying, but what is good content? The main or the key item here is consistency. And obviously structured authoring can greatly help you leverage consistency within your content. Unstructured authoring certainly can as well, though it requires a little bit more effort up front. You're going to probably rely heavily on an editor to make sure that your content is consistent all the way through. You want to reuse and repurpose as much as possible, so whether you're unstructured or structured, being able to reuse blocks of content is critical if you're delivering the same message in multiple places. And I highly recommend using linguistic analytic tools and also QA tools. One that I highly recommend and one that we use internally here with our clients is LinguaLinx, where we're able to actually run checks based on our client styles before they go to localize. This way we can trap anything that was maybe missed by a human editor or maybe didn't pass through a human editor, and work on finding nuances in wording and commit these nuances to a very specific singular phrase before we go ahead and translate. This will keep your costs down. Consistency and unique content is also important, so whether you're reusing content or not, you need to make sure that you're maintaining adherence to style and that you're targeting your messages appropriately based on your style and your brand. Translations should read as if they were originally crafted in the target language. This is critical. There are many times that you may open a package that comes from another country, and there'll be a makeshift translation in the box, let's say, that is questionable at best. It's critical that you reach people in the way that they expect to be reached and addressed. You got to make sure that your layout responds to the way they expect to read things, and when you do lay things out, make sure that you're anticipating language, text expansion, text shrinkage. In some cases, other languages are shorter than what you might be writing in. That you're being consistent with your terminology, and that you're writing as concisely as possible and as clearly and directly as possible. When you're authoring your content, avoid complex or lengthy sentences. Avoid abbreviations as much as possible, as well as slang, jargon, or any other kind of undefined acronym. If you're using invented words, make sure they're well defined. Otherwise, please don't use them, because your translator is not going to understand what it is that you're trying to say and may not be able to translate it appropriately in their target language. And try to avoid anything portraying a particular way of life in a singular culture, unless you plan on recreating that from the ground up for each specific market that you're targeting. Performing audience analysis is key across the board to get a full cultural understanding of where your audience is. People consume information and react to it very, very differently. And it's easier to plan up front than to backpedal on something that you mistakenly released and potentially insulted a particular country or customer group. In order to do this, I highly recommend making sure that everything you are planning on distributing goes through a full linguistic and localization analysis, and test it for that regional market. Make sure everything makes sense, that it's culturally appropriate, that it's not culturally offensive, and that it's just clear and easy to understand. You have to develop, just as you would for any kind of audience analysis, your output is the most appropriate information for the appropriate audience in the most appropriate manner possible to achieve the greatest value for them. And finally, one other poll I'd like to take is what type of information you primarily create. And already at 65%, we're seeing, how about that? I think it's unanimous here that everyone on this webcast is producing technical content, which is very good to know. But please understand that even though your content is technical in nature, that it does serve a marketing purpose, and it is used as a sales tool in many regards. And you have to make sure that you keep those needs in mind when you're moving forward with localization. I want to talk a little bit now about designing templates and layouts that fit every need. And there's a whole lot of examples that I could give here, but you have to think about the fact that your target translation may expand as far as text length goes, and it may reduce. And you need to really keep that in mind, because if you have a very fixed layout, you might have a problem if you're going from English to German, where German words tend to be a lot longer, especially if you're using multiple columns. You may find that you have a lot of word wrapping or very jagged edges to contend with, which may not be visually appealing or easy to read. If you have graphics, any text that you use with those graphics, keep them separate. You can overlay them on top of them, but make they are kept within a separate editable text box at all times. Do not send your translator a flattened image, because they are not going to be able to do anything with it unless you want them to completely recreate it from scratch, in which case you're really asking them to bill you a large sum of money. And if your needs vary, of course, so should your templates. A standard template for most Romance languages is not going to be ideal for going into any kind of right-to-left language. So if you are planning on targeting Middle East, let's say, you need to make sure that you have templates that do handle both left-to-right and right-to-left languages. and make sure that anything that is designed graphically appeals to what is culturally anticipated and expected in your target audiences. Now here's a nice little example that we have here. Here we have a article section. It takes up just a section of a page, and what you don't really see is the overall size and scope of this. This was an English text, and this just laid out in English, and we kind of fudged a lot of the names and so forth in here. But you can see that it's rather dense. This is 7-point font in 4 columns, and I believe this was on an 8.5 and 11 sheet of paper on the bottom half of it, so, or perhaps in that particular region. Obviously, this was intended to go to Spanish, and Spanish generally increases by roughly about 25% in length, 20 to 25 anyway. So you can see that just from looking at this dense pack of English, adding 20% of content is roughly going to equate to adding a 5th column of text. This was not designed for expansion, and our client needs things to be presented within this 4-column block. So the options here are either to edit text down, which takes time and effort, or we essentially work to make it illegible by dropping the font size down to 6 points or 5 point, in which case, just to fit it all, which I would not recommend. Using localization-friendly technologies is extremely important. The tools you use should not dictate your localization plan, but they should support it. So if you are going to be localizing, make sure that your tools respond to that and not dictate how it's going to happen. My greatest recommendation would be to use a content management system whenever possible. That way you're storing information in purposeful chunks, you're translating chunks at a time, or you can do a bulk translation easily as well. Each chunk can be used and reused as however you need it. Write once, translate once, use anywhere. And until you make a change to the English, your translation should always be appropriate for where you're using it. And the best part is that a content management system can export content free of layout and images, and it exports it usually in an XML-based format or some other structured format, which is incredibly easy for translation companies to then consume into their translation tools in order to get the work done. Almost all of your content management systems out there will evolve with changing needs, and most facilitate publishing for multiple outputs anyway, so you'll be able to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak, by being able to both manage a lot of your multilingual content and your source content, as well as being able to publish for them and store templates for publishing to them. If you can't use a CMS, I recommend using XML or some kind of structured language if at all possible. And if you can't, at least try to use tools that support reuse. This way you're not retyping over and over again the same sentences that may at some point have varying formatting, varying whatnot, a comma here, missing there, or changing of words based on stylistic preference of the person writing it. You want to make sure that your content is as consistent as possible, and the best way to do that, of course, is leveraging for reuse. Tools that import and export in non-proprietary formats are key. When you go out for translation with a tool that only exports to a proprietary format, chances are that can't be easily leveraged by your translation company without a lot of extra work. Chances are they'll have to take that content and kind of kludge a solution around to get that content into some non-proprietary format in order to just get it into their translation tools, then get it back out and basically run the kludge in reverse to get it into that proprietary format again and then into your proprietary tool. So making sure that you have an easy import-export is critical. for keeping your costs down and for lowering your time to production. And also global control over formatting is critical, so being able to have templates, being able to globally update styles, it really is critical when you start thinking about localization, because there may need to be some sweeping changes that need to be made, either based on fonts or font size, particular types of leading or what have you. Being able to do that in one complete singular sweep is a lot easier than having to go through each individual paragraph and make these changes by hand. And other tools that you need.
Bill, sorry.
Yes.
There's a question here about the non-proprietary formats, and I suspect some other people have the same question. What do you mean by non-proprietary format, and does FrameMaker export to a non-proprietary format?
FrameMaker does export to MIF, which is readable by pretty much any text editor, and then that can be consumed fairly easily. And a lot of the translation tools out there will accept FrameMaker format as well. But by proprietary format, I'm talking about something a little bit more obscure. If you're using a very customized tool to produce content, I've had a few of them come across, and a lot of them generally are the less mainstream tools where they're designed for a niche market by a niche developer. In those cases, it's very difficult to get content out of them and back into them. Also, considering if your company is building a web CMS, to make sure that they're using or at least basing it on one of the open formats that are out there, or using one of the established for purchase content management systems for the web. Because if they're building their own content management system from the ground up, chances are they may not be thinking about exactly how they're going to get content out and how they're going to manage translations. I've seen a lot of very interesting approaches where they may build a localization backend or utility into the back end of the CMS, which is, on paper it looks very, very useful. But then you consider that anything you type into that back end doesn't get consumed within translation memory, and therefore can't be leveraged when you're translating moving forward. So it's kind of critical to always think about how you're going to get content out of whatever format it is that or whatever tool it is that you're developing your content in, and into a tool that will reflect against translation memory, because the more you can store within your translation memory over time, the cheaper your translation costs are going to be over time, especially if you're being consistent about how you're writing. I hope I answered that question okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, talking a bit about some of the tools and technologies to leverage, there are a lot of soft tools. They'll give you some really solid gains. Style guides are critical, as are glossaries and terminology lists. Not only are they critical for your audience to understand what you're talking about, but they're critical for your translators to wrap their heads around specifically what you mean when you talk about certain things. Your translator may be well-versed in your industry, but they may not know every little detail about how your company approaches what it does. And having these glossaries and terminology lists in place will really help make sure that you're getting the correct translation, not only for your target audience, but for your company's image toward that target audience. Make sure that you have solid workflows and processes in place, and that everything is documented about who's involved at what stage, doing when, how they need to be contacted. Having all of this is critical, because if something breaks down, you need to understand exactly where you need to go back to in order to fix the process before you get to localization or during the localization process. And having that clear, open, and direct communication. A lot of people question whether or not this is a tool, but it's critical. Very clearly communicate with the rest of your team, with your translation vendor, with anyone who's involved in producing what it is you're delivering to your target customers and target markets. Making sure that you have clear communication, that there's no perceived or anticipated contention between the groups, make sure that it's open and direct so that you can cut to the chase and get any issues resolved as quickly as possible. And finally, it's critical also that you ensure that the easiest path for round-tripping your content. We talked a little bit about this with proprietary formats versus non-proprietary formats. Again, most translation happens outside of your source content development tools. So if you're developing in FrameMaker, your translation is not going to happen in FrameMaker. FrameMaker content is going to be exported and consumed by a tool that reflects against translation memory in order to leverage as much reuse as possible on the translation side. And then that tool will export back to FrameMaker format, at which point then you have a visual QA that happens on both the content and the layout. So content needs to be easily exported, and it needs to be easily imported into whatever tools you're using in order to have the quickest and most inexpensive round trip of the localization process. I have a bit of a case study here. Unfortunately, I can't name names, but we have a client who's a rather large North American vendor, and they have 26 European markets as well that they support. Over the past couple of years, we've been working with them to introduce XML-based structured authoring and to centralize a lot of their workflows. We also centralized all of their translation memories. We went ahead and consolidated their glossaries and all of their term bases, and we revamped their entire desktop publishing process. What we're seeing as far as results go is a much shorter time to market for all of their frequently changing and updated content. They're able to really start targeting their markets almost simultaneously, which is a huge step for them. Their entire enterprise brand is now consistently portrayed across all of their markets, rather than a previous process was that each individual country had their own market manager, which may, who may have custom tailored their company brand toward their particular needs, but it may not have reflected exactly what the parent company would have wanted. So now everything is consistent from the top level down and out, and it considers all of the different market needs in that process, rather than having an ad hoc process to make sure the brand hits after it's been developed. They're seeing significant savings through a lot of their costing, and they're seeing a lot of savings through a lot of their reuse now. Actually, they're seeing savings upwards of, because they are becoming completely consistent in how they're developing content and how they're distributing it, they're seeing almost 60% savings year over year at this point, which is absolutely tremendous. And with increased project management, we actually work directly with their project management teams, with our own project managers, and kind of share the burden for how a lot of this work is produced. So we're able to really nimbly respond to issues and also move projects through at a much quicker rate. So we have some tremendous savings there as well with them. And just to recap, again, the 6 easy ways to control your localization costs: planning up front, consulting with your vendor throughout the entire process, being consistent, using controlled content whenever possible, making sure your layouts meet every need, that you're using friendly technologies, and that you are able to round-trip content easily. They will all really work to keeping your localization costs down and your quality as high as possible. And for more information, you can go to LinguaLinx.com or GlobalScript.com to learn more information about our localization services, or exactly how we might be able to help you with achieving some savings in this regard. You can contact me direct at bswallow@lingualinx.com, and you can follow us on Twitter. My personal handle is Bill Swallow. You can also follow LinguaLinx and GlobalScript. And I thank you for your time.
And I believe we have some questions.
Excellent.
Yeah, at this point, go ahead, lovely attendee, people who are muted, go ahead and drop your questions into the questions area. I've got a couple already sitting here that we want to address. And so while you're typing, we'll deal with those, and then we'll see what else we have. Regarding, let's see, slide number 5, I think technique number 5, there's a reference here to the Global English Style Guide by John Cole, and a question as to what do you think of the Global English approach. Let's see, John Cole, to advise as to creating content that is easier to translate or read by non-native English speakers. What do you think of this approach?
It's a very sound approach, and we do recommend it. However, using that alone will not solve all of your problems. You're going to need to make sure that you adapt everything that you're writing to not only reflect using a global English standard, but also making sure that you have your brand in place. So how your company needs to position itself within the markets that you're addressing, you need to make sure that that is also reflected in the language that you're using, and address that not only with a global corporate style guide, but also a targeted regional style guide that takes into consideration if there are any specific cultural references or specific cultural needs in the target markets, that they are being addressed at the same time, so that you can flag things that need to be reworded, that need to be transcreated, so that when it comes time to localize for those markets, that you have a plan for that as well. But yeah, absolutely keeping it simple, sticking with you know, a global style for writing is critical whenever, you know, at least starting out, and you'll find where you need to make tweaks.
You've talked a lot about working with an LSP, with a localization services partner or provider. Do you have any recommendations on how to do that, how to find a good vendor? How do you find that right fit?
Well, unfortunately, you got to do legwork. I'd love to say, hey, come use us, but and actually I will say, hey, come use us, but the truth is you really need to do your homework to vet your vendors. And one is just seeing how quickly and readily they respond, whether they are simply responding to your questions, or if they are causing you to think further about, you know, your approaches and so forth. Ideally, I mean, there are two ways to go. One, you can look for the person who has the cheapest word count, or cheapest price per word, and hope that you get the translation back on time and in good quality. Or you can go with someone who is eager to consult with you and help you, you know, actually tailor your message to the target audience and make sure that you're doing everything in the most beneficial way for both you, to save you money down the road, and also to help you best target your audience. There are a lot of resources out on the web for how to vet your translation vendor. A lot of people take the RFP route, and it does work, but I will caution that it's not a light process for anyone involved, so make sure that you are putting ample time into properly defining what it is that you want out of this RFP that you're creating, and making sure that you are as specific as possible so you can evaluate as critically as possible the areas that you're interested in. Others are sending out very, very small pieces for sample translation and see what you get back. However, that will only really show you a snapshot of quality within that specific example. So you know, you kind of need to do all three, where, you know, you need to have that investigation to see what it is that these different vendors provide, whether or not it fits your needs and your market needs, seeing how they interact with you, whether they're very eager to answer your questions, whether they appear knowledgeable about the subject matter, you know, if they're agreeable to meet, and so forth, and that they keep to their promises is a big one. I hope I answered that question okay.
I think that answers it. There's a question about your case study.
Yes.
And it's specifically, now it says TM, I'm going to assume translation memory. What
yes,
is
it
used
is.
to centralize the TM and such, and how are they doing this? Well, it might also be terminology management. So.
It is translation memory, and what we're doing to centralize that is there is an implementation of World Server that's actually being used. Now this client is starting to grow out of their implementation of World Server at the same time. By that I mean that there's a new cost structure, I believe, in place. So there's a lot of contention there right now, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with that, but they're using World Server to centralize all of their translation memories and to centralize a lot of their translation workflow. And what we do in this case is we log in directly to their World Server implementation as users to help facilitate the process. And from there we go ahead and leverage the TMs and get the work done.
Okay. There's another interesting question here. Bill, should website content and customer documentation content be translated by the same translation company, and what if they're not?
I would say yes, and well, that's the easy answer. Yes, they should, because you may not have a lot of reuse happening, but a lot of your terminology and a lot of the approaches that you're going to take to localize your content are going to be used in both mediums. If you're not using the same vendor, the best advice I can give you is to make sure that you have a very solidly managed translation memory. And you may want to manage that in-house or use whatever primary translation vendor you have, manage that by consuming both TMs or TMs from however many different translation companies you're using, consuming them all and performing routine cleanups and routine checks against all of the content within there to make sure that you don't have conflicting translations and to make sure that you are getting the most leverage as possible. Otherwise, you will see savings by using two different translation memories for two different purposes. In some cases, it may make sense if your content is that different, but you run the risk of having terms being translated differently by these two different companies for these two different purposes, and that may not be what you need to, what you want.
So inconsistency between the two types of content.
You may have inconsistency between the two types, again, both on the source and in the translation. And even if the source is identical, you may have conflict in how it's being translated based on preference and what's available in whatever TM they're using to reflect on.
Mm-hmm. What about in-house translation?
In-house translation, I'd say it's perfectly fine if you have qualified people to do the translation. If you're asking someone to work overtime and they're not a certified translator, or if they're not a experienced translator, if they just speak the language, they may not be able to translate it as effectively as someone who knows how to target that specific market and has professional training on how to translate things for wider audiences. So again, looking at the common perception that anyone can write, I don't want to see people falling into the same pitfall where they think that anyone can translate. Just because you can speak a language and that you're bilingual does not mean that you are an ideal translator for the content. You might be, and it requires some some vetting on your part to make sure that the people you're using internally are qualified to do that translation for that market. But I'd say go for it if you can. If it makes sense for you. For a lot of companies, it just doesn't, because unless they're hired specifically only to do the translation, they have a day job that they need to perform to support your company. And adding translation on top of that, it's either going to cause a lacking or a slight in quality on the day job that they're performing, or a quality issue on the translation that they're performing, because they're either rushed or overworked.
So you would not advocate the, oh, we'll just hand it to the in-country sales staff and let them figure it out?
I don't advocate that at all. I know a lot of companies do this, and you know, to be really honest here, we get a lot of material coming back to us saying, well, yeah, we originally had our sales team over in Brazil translate this for us, and we got a lot of negative comments on our website about X, Y, and Z. And then looking at the translation closer, maybe we're not doing it the right way, and we'd have our professional translators go ahead and take a look at it and get that wide-eyed look saying, oh yeah, I see exactly what's happening here, and be able to fix that for them. So I mean, if you have certified quality translators working for you in-house, great, but if you don't, I really caution against just having someone who happens to speak the language do the translation.
Okay, so do you have any final words of wisdom for the group here?
The only thing I can really reiterate, and it kind of shows in the progress of the presentation I gave, is that you really have to plan from the beginning. And the more you plan for in the beginning, the more you're able to respond to issues down the road. So, keeping your localization vendor, whoever it might be, in the loop from start to finish is critical, because they're going to give you insight that you may not have even thought about, market insight that your marketing team may not have thought about. So it's really critical that you incorporate as much localization planning as possible from the very beginning, and kind of stick with that rolling rolling incorporation and rolling teamwork to make sure that you're getting the absolute best bang for your buck.
All right. Well, Bill, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
All his contact information is there. We should have the recording available within a day or two, and you should all see an email about that. So thank you all for coming, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next event. Bill, I think we are reconvening in person. I don't know, what is the upcoming conference schedule? It looks like LavaCon in October.
I believe so.
I believe so. So hopefully we will see some of you there, and I believe I will also be at TCOM at the beginning of October, or maybe the other way around. I can't remember. So thank you all for coming, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye, Bill.
Bye.